My husband, Rafiq, was a good man. Quiet, soft-spoken, never raised his voice, not even when he probably should have. He lived in routines. Morning prayers, tea with 2 sugars, office by 9, home by 6, dinner by 7. Predictable. Safe. Simple, too simple that I never married him for excitement. I married him because he was steady, reliable, a man who wouldn't hurt me. But as the years passed, I found myself suffocating under the weight of sameness. Conversations became monosyllables. Intimacy, a monthly ritual more out of obligation than passion. And then, there were his brothers. Adil and Samir were nothing like Rafiq. They were fire to his stillness, color to his grayscale. Adil, the elder, ran his own boutique interior design firm. Hands that shaped wood, eyes that noticed the smallest details, he could transform a dull room into something magnetic. He spoke in metaphors and always smelled faintly of cedar and cologne. Samir, the younger one, was a trained chef. He cooked like he was composing music, sauces that melted on the tongue, spices that danced on the palate. He laughed easily, deeply, and often at family gatherings. They were the stars. I would sit silently in the corner, sipping juice, pretending not to stare. But I watched everything. How Adil fixed the broken cabinet in our kitchen in 10 minutes while Rafiq stood beside him, unsure of which tool to hand over. How Samir pulled out a chair for me, handed me a plate he'd styled like a restaurant dish, and winked when I said thank you. They made me feel noticed, if only in passing. And that was more than I was used to. I started looking forward to Eid dinners and weekend barbecues with an eagerness that felt shameful. I would try on 3 dresses before settling on the one that hugged me just enough to be tasteful. I'd fix my hair, add a touch of gloss, all the while pretending it was just for the pictures we never took. It wasn't that I didn't love my husband. I did, in a quiet, enduring sort of way. But love wasn't always enough to fill the hollowness that built up in silence. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from being unseen. With Rafiq, I felt invisible. With his brothers, I felt awakened. Once, after dinner, Adil caught me in the kitchen drying a glass. He stood close, closer than needed, and said, "You always make things feel warmer here. It's not just the food." He smiled and left. It shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. I remember that night vividly, not because of what happened, but because of what almost did. That was the first time I admitted something dangerous to myself. I wanted more, and I was beginning to wonder if wanting was the first step to losing everything. It began with innocent messages. Adil had sent me a photo of a bookshelf he'd restored, asking for my opinion on the color. I replied with enthusiasm, complimented his craft. He responded with a joke, then another message, then a meme that made me laugh out loud. From there, the line between casual and curious blurred. We started talking more, mostly late at night. It was easier then, when Rafiq had fallen asleep beside me, breathing softly, unaware. At first, we stuck to safe topics: design, food, family gossip. But gradually, the exchanges deepened. He began asking about my days, my moods, my dreams. He remembered things my husband often forgot: how I hated the sound of ticking clocks, how I preferred mangoes over apples, how I once wanted to be a writer. With every message, I felt more visible. There was a warmth to Adil's words, a deliberate attentiveness that wrapped around me like a silk shawl. He spoke to me like I was still someone fascinating, someone worth discovering. I told myself it was harmless. Just conversation. But I knew. Somewhere deep beneath the justifications, I knew what I was nurturing. One afternoon, while preparing lunch, Rafiq walked into the kitchen and asked, "Why are you smiling?" I wasn't aware I was. I lied and said I was remembering an old joke. He kissed my cheek, told me he was lucky to have me. I swallowed the guilt like bitter tea. Adil had become my secret escape. He filled in the silences left by Rafiq's simplicity, not maliciously, but instinctively. And still, I hadn't touched him. I hadn't even been alone with him since that evening in the kitchen. But I felt tethered to something unspoken, some invisible current between us that neither of us dared name, and yet, the boundary kept bending. One day, he messaged, "You ever feel like you were meant for something fuller? Like you're living a version of life someone else chose for you?" The words unsettled me. Not because they were bold, but because they echoed thoughts I'd buried for years. That evening, I looked across the dinner table at Rafiq. He was talking about a broken faucet at work, how he'd fixed it using duct tape. His eyes lit up, proud of this tiny, mundane victory. I smiled and nodded, but inside, I was somewhere else, scrolling back through Adil's messages, rereading every line. Adil hadn't touched me, but he lived in my mind now. Occupied space that once belonged solely to my husband. That night, I asked myself something I had been afraid to ask before: when does infidelity begin? With a kiss? Or with a thought you don't want to stop thinking? I wasn't sure anymore, but I knew I was already standing on the edge, and leaning forward. It happened on a Sunday evening, after a family dinner that lingered longer than usual. The rain had started just as the plates were being cleared, turning the garden into a blur of silver. Everyone else had left early, citing the weather. Rafiq had offered to drop his parents home. Adil stayed behind to help clean up. That I should have gone upstairs. I should have busied myself, avoided the quiet. But I stayed. That we moved around the kitchen in silence. I dried the plates while he rinsed them, our arms occasionally brushing, sending jolts through the air like static. The room was warm from the stove, but I felt a different kind of heat beneath my skin, restless and rising. That he handed me a glass, our fingers touching just a second too long. "You look tired," he said softly, not accusing, not pitiful, just observant. "Not tired," I replied, avoiding his gaze. "Just hollow." The word surprised even me. Adil turned off the faucet. The kitchen filled with the hush of rain tapping on the windows. "I think about you more than I should," he said. There it was, plain, unadorned, irreversible. That I should have walked away. I should have said something that closed the space between us, not widened it. Instead, I whispered, "Me too." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pulsed as he stepped closer. No one raised a hand. No one made a sound. But something unspoken cracked open between us. His lips met mine. That it wasn't desperate. It wasn't frenzied. It was slow, deliberate, like a truth finally spoken. My body responded before my mind could protest. I felt alive in a way that frightened me, every nerve tuned to the electricity of the forbidden. That we didn't go far that night. No clothes were shed, no bedsheets stained. But the kiss, long, lingering, dangerous, was enough. It shattered the illusion I had clung to, the fragile story I told myself that it was all just emotional, just imagination. When Rafiq returned, I was already upstairs, lights off, pretending to sleep. He kissed my forehead, tucked the blanket around me, and whispered, "You're everything to me." I turned away, blinking hard, trying to swallow the storm in my chest. The next morning, Adil didn't message. The silence was louder than any word. He hadn't just stepped away, he had shut the door behind him. That I went through the motions with Rafiq, breakfast, prayers, smiles. But I felt like a thief in my own home, stealing warmth from a man who still looked at me like I was his miracle. And yet, even in the guilt, part of me still burned with the memory of that kiss. Not because it was right, but because it revealed everything I was missing. By nightfall, I sat alone in the dark, repeating one sentence in my head: it wasn't supposed to happen. But now that it has, what comes next? Adil never mentioned the kiss again. That he didn't text, didn't linger at gatherings, didn't meet my eyes across the room. He had vanished, not physically, but emotionally, retreating behind a wall I couldn't breach. Whether it was guilt or regret that drove him away, I never knew. All I knew was that I had been left to carry the weight alone. Rafiq noticed the change. Of course he did. He wasn't stupid, just trusting. He asked, gently at first, if something was wrong. I denied it. Then came the careful questions. Had he done something? Was I tired? Unwell? Each time, I shook my head, offered tired smiles, blamed the weather, the workload, hormones, anything but the truth. What was I supposed to say? That I'd betrayed him in the most cowardly way? That I'd longed for a man who disappeared the moment I leaned in? One evening, as we sat together in the living room, Rafiq handed me a cup of tea. No words, just a simple gesture. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the kindness I had once loved. His eyes were tired, rimmed with the quiet ache of someone holding onto something slipping through his fingers. I may not be exciting, he said, as if reading my silence, but I've always tried to be enough. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight with shame that I and the days that followed. I tried to reclaim what I had taken for granted. I laughed at his jokes again. I asked about his day. I touched his hand during meals. But it all felt rehearsed, like trying to paint over cracks in a foundation already broken. Adil stayed distant. Eventually, he stopped coming to family events altogether. Rumors floated, something about a new relationship, work stress. I didn't ask. I couldn't afford to want more. Still, at night, when the house fell silent, I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, haunted not by what we did, but by what it revealed. The kiss had opened a wound, but the silence afterward carved the scar. I had gambled with something precious for a feeling that vanished as quickly as it came. Rafiq would sometimes reach for my hand in his sleep, and I would let him. Not because I deserved his affection, but because I needed the illusion of forgiveness, if only for a moment. That I never told him, not because I was afraid of his anger, but because I knew it would destroy the one thing that still held us together, his belief in me. And so I lived between two truths: the comfort of a man who loved me completely, and the memory of a man who made me feel briefly unforgettable. Desire had a price, and I had paid it in silence. Sometimes, in the quiet, I still asked myself, what matters more, being loved gently, or being wanted fiercely, even if only for a moment? I haven't found the answer, but I'm still here, pretending I never asked the question at all.